This is Autoline Daily, the show dedicated to enthusiasts of the global automotive industry. Donald Trump is still 2 months away from being sworn in as President of the United States, but he's already trying to legislate through social media. On his True Social platform, Trump promised to slap tariffs on virtually all imports, and that promise is rippling out across the global economy. Shares of European car makers fell on the news, with Stellantis leading the way. Its stock fell over 4%. Daimler Truck fell 3.5%. Mercedes and Porsche were down 2%, while BMW and VW were down 1%. And now Mexico, which exports 2.2 million vehicles to the U.S. every year, is suddenly slow-walking BYD's application to build an assembly plant there. Several Mexican states have dialed back the incentives they were offering to BYD, and the federal government isn't happy with the timing of BYD's efforts. It worries that if it approves a Chinese company to build an assembly plant now, it could risk access to the U.S. market under Trump. But what everyone is wondering is this: is Trump really going to slap big tariffs on everything? Or is this just a tactic to get favorable trade deals from other countries? Meanwhile, over in Europe, automakers are begging legislators to ease off their CO2 emission regulations for next year. The ACEA, which is the European Automakers Trade Association, says that the car companies can't meet those standards due to factors outside of their control, namely insufficient public charging stations for electric cars and not enough subsidies for consumers to buy them. This year, new cars must average 115 grams of CO2 per kilometer. Next year, it drops to 93.6 grams. And if they don't hit that number, automakers have to pay a fine of 95 euros per gram per kilometer driven for every single car that misses the target. In 2030, the standard drops to only 49.5 grams of CO2 per kilometer, and then to zero in 2035. So automakers potentially face billions of euros in fines. And based on a report from the European Environment Agency, currently no automaker in Europe will hit that standard except for Tesla. The worst offenders are Volkswagen, Ford, and the Toyota Group, which includes Mazda, Subaru, and Suzuki. Mercedes and BMW are also well off the mark. The automakers that come closest are Kia, Hyundai, and Stellantis. However, there is one loophole. Automakers can pool their emissions together, where companies with lower emissions can combine with those that have higher ones. For example, Honda and JLR have pooled their emissions with Tesla. Up until now, pooling allowed automakers to avoid fines. But next year could be a disaster for the industry, and the ACEA warns that the clock is ticking.
Knowing that a little rain won't slow down your day, that's what really matters. Bridgestone Turanza Quiet Track tires, confident control in wet conditions.
GM and Hyundai made waves in September by signing a memorandum of understanding to explore ways to collaborate on vehicles, supply chains, and clean energy tech. Well, now a Korean publication reports that leaders from both companies met again earlier this month to discuss the partnership, and during that time talked about jointly developing pickup trucks. It says they're considering rebadging models, but don't know who will provide the platform yet, and that the trucks would be aimed at the Latin American market. Last year, just over 1 million pickup trucks were sold in the region, with the Toyota Hilux topping the charts. But with more models, like the BYD Shark, and now possibly 2 more from GM and Hyundai, automakers must feel there's room for growth. Another benefit is these trucks can usually be adapted for other pickup-friendly markets like Africa, Australia, and the Middle East. California is planning to revive subsidies for purchasing an EV if the Trump administration follows through on its threat to remove federal EV credits. The state phased out its EV incentives last year, But Governor Gavin Newsom says those credits will come back if the federal ones are eliminated. However, Newsom says that Tesla will be excluded from receiving incentives, which Elon Musk blasted as insane. And speaking of EV incentives, Rivian just received preliminary approval for a $6.6 billion U.S. federal loan for its planned EV plant in Georgia. Rivian delayed construction of the plant earlier this year to help cut costs as it struggled to ramp up production at its plant in Illinois. The factory in Georgia will build Rivian's upcoming R2 and R3 SUVs. The site will be built in 2 phases and have an initial capacity of 200,000 vehicles, which will increase to 400,000 in the future. Production is targeted to begin in 2028, but Rivian needs to meet certain technical, legal, environmental, and financial conditions to be able to finalize the loan. Most automakers have scaled back EV plans because sales aren't where they expected them to be, and now Porsche is the latest. It previously set a goal of 80% BEV sales by the end of the decade, but now the company's chief financial officer says it's going to continue developing ICEs because its EV demand is cooling. Through September, EVs accounted for 7.3% of Porsche's global sales, down from 12% a year ago, and that's mostly due to a nearly 30% slump in EV sales in China. Next year, Porsche expects its sales of electrics to improve a bit with the updated Taycan and the all-new Macan electric arriving in showrooms. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum is selling off some impressive race cars from its collection, in part to help fund new renovations. 9 of the 11 vehicles are estimated to bring in up to $34 million. But the 2 crown jewels of the auction are expected to bring in a lot more. A 1964 Ferrari that won Le Mans is estimated to bring in excess of $26 million, while a 1954 Mercedes, driven by both Juan Manuel Fangio and Sir Sterling Moss, is expected to fetch over $52.5 million, although some have it valued closer to $70 million. The cars will be auctioned by RM Sotheby's at events in Stuttgart, Paris, and Miami. Speaking of racing, and as a follow-up to yesterday, GM officially revealed it will enter F1 in 2026 under the Cadillac brand. Reports say it will initially use Ferrari engines, but GM says it will build its own vehicles and power units by the end of the decade. Also, another follow-up. Here's a little bit more detail of that luxury sedan, the Maestro S800, which comes from tech company Huawei and Chinese automaker JAC. It says it will offer level 3 self-driving capabilities, but as a model that's supposed to compete with Bentley and Rolls-Royce, a portion of owners may never get behind the wheel. Starting prices for the S800 range from about $140,000 up to $200,000, and the company is already taking deposits. As a quick reminder, with the Thanksgiving Day holiday approaching in the U.S., Autoline will be off on Thursday and Friday of this week. But that brings us to the end of today's show, and thanks for tuning in.
Autoline Daily is brought to you by Bridgestone, solutions for your journey. Intrepid Control Systems, over-the-air engineering boost your game. And by Teijin Automotive Technologies, the formula for better mobility.
There's nothing wrong with heavy metal.
Hey, lighten up.
But with world-class composite material, Teijin Automotive Technologies makes vehicles lighter, safer, and more eco-friendly.
Developing today's vehicles, issues can happen in an instant. What good is knowing your problems without the data to solve them? Meet Wireless Neovi Cloud, your secure off-the-shelf solution, empowering real-time collaboration for quick resolution. With Wireless Nearby Cloud, your team can prevent issues before they can escalate. Driver communication data and remote diagnostics to analyze and resolve your problems using OTA, allowing your executives oversight throughout the process. Wireless Nearby Cloud, your vehicle update solution in production and on the road. Intrepid Control Systems, driven by your data.